Hello and welcome to GCSE OPA Sociology, and today we're going to be looking at what are sampling frames. So just first thing off the cusp for you to do now, 5 questions in 5 minutes. So just answer those questions, pause the video for 5 minutes, and then I'll go over them. Right, so just jumping straight into it. Number 1, who are the 3 founding fathers of sociology? So that's Durkheim, Marx, and Weber. Number 2, what is the difference between reliability and validity? So remember, reliability is talking about whether the research is repeatable, whereas validity, they're concentrating on is there detail, is there depth to the answers? Number 3, which theory is associated with social action approach to sociology? So that is interactionism. Number 4, what 2 ethical and 2 practical considerations outline 2 ethical and 2 practical considerations to make during research, So starting with the ethical ones. So anonymity or confidentiality, just a generic one, Nuremberg codes, and that kind of refers to not misleading, not harming. Data protection, consent as well. And then for practicalities, these are not all of them. These are some of them, but considering the time and the money, whether you've got both of those, has it actually got purpose what you're researching? Is it bias? And then number 5, so the difference between a peer review and a pilot study. So a peer review, so that's when sociologists critique research. And then a pilot study is a test run of your research. So they're both trying to do the same thing, but the pilot studies, maybe you're getting your department of sociologists to look at your research before it goes out there. What's good about it, what's bad. Whereas a pilot study is looking at doing a smaller version, almost like a beta or a demo of your research. Okay, so just for task 1, I want you to write down what is sampling and why we do it. So sampling or sample frames refer to a list of participants you are studying in your project. And they're reflecting a smaller version of the population being studied. So maybe just note that down, the bits in red. So an example of that is essentially just a list of names. So you might see that, and it looks just like a school register, a list of names, or you might be a bit too young for this reference, but an address book, the yellow pages. So we use a sample in order to represent the wider population. So that's called generalizability. So that the study is a true reflection of the social world being studied. So we're trying to take literally a chunk out of that population that we're trying to explore, take a smaller version of it out. And that's what the sample is. And you can see that there in the image. There's 2 different types of sampling that I want you to reference. So there is first probability sampling, and that refers to really a quantitative approach, whereby the sample is based on a known population. So you know who you're studying, you know a certain percentage in terms of different stratifications and classifications. So you might know what percentage of men to women there are, to different ethnic groups, to different classes, different ages. And then on the flip side of that, you've got a bit more of a fluid approach. So you've got a non-probability sample. And that's often unknown, and it's generally associated with being a qualitative approach. So just write down the differences between those 2 samples very quickly. Okay, so we're not going to watch the video because we've got it all on the screen here. And we're going to go through it. But for task 3, we're just going to really understand the different types of probability sampling. So just answer question 1, 2, and 3 there. So starting with number 1, what is a random sample? So that's when everyone has an equal chance of being selected from the sampling frame. So think of it this way, in terms of a class register, you might throw all those names into a hat and you're just picking 10 at random. And you're then going to question those people. It's a good approach, but sometimes it can accidentally lead to bias. Let's say if accidentally 9 out of them 10 times you choose men from your sampling frame, it just happens to be that you're pulling out nine men as opposed to a mix, 5 each, women and men. So sometimes you get things like that where you haven't really got enough of a specific classification. And then we move on to systematic sampling. So it's also known as quasi-sampling, and you have a pattern of selecting people in your sample. So it's still very random, but it's really fair because you're just from that list going, okay, I'm going to pick, let's say, for example, every 10th person. But again, it can unintentionally be representative. And then finally, this is probably the most representative approach. You have a stratified sample. That's when you organize your sample into stratification. So like I was saying, into those categories. And you're trying to ensure that you get at least one from each one of those categories. You have a range of variables that reflect the population. So I've got it here, an example. You are splitting, say, people into their sex, so male, female, or based on their ethnicity or maybe their class, and then you're randomly picking from that group. So it's good because it avoids accidental bias, and it also avoids being unrepresentative. But it can be a bit complicated sometimes, knowing how many classifications to have. So we've just gone through those 3 examples there: random sampling, systematic sampling, and stratified sampling. So they're all the probability types or the quantitative approaches. We're going to move on now to the non-probability ones, and there's 2 we're going to look at. The first of which, and I want you to again write down these 2 concepts and what they are. So we've got, first off, snowball sampling. And snowball sampling, think of it like a snowball going down a hill. It gathers more and more snow. It's exactly the same. So the people you're contacting, the participants, you are essentially asking them if there's anyone else who might be worth interviewing. So you might start off asking participant 1, and participant 1 has 3 friends who would also be eligible for that study. So those 3 people join on, and then one of them ends up bringing another 3 people, and then another 3, and then another 3. And through that, you're getting this ripple effect of more people joining. So it is a convenient approach very much, but it does lead to issues in terms of sampling bias, and participants can pick people based on perceived results the researcher wants. And then finally, there's quota sampling. So simple as that, you have a quota of variables, or you have a quota of how many people you want. So it might be on a high street, you go, okay, I want to pick 10 men, 10 women, something like that. And once you've reached that, you're done. And it's very convenient, so it's very good for not wasting too much time, but it's often reliant on people volunteering. And generally those people who volunteer might be overly friendly or willing to partake. It might not actually be reflective of your average person. Okay, so we're not going to do the final task, but I'm just going to leave this on the screen because it gives you an idea of how you're going to pick people to do your research. You can just see it all there on one page.